Abibi Fahudie and blessings to the ancestors. It's Deshaun here with the new Blacklash video, here to give an introductory type and presentation to a reoccurring subject that we will be discussing here, which is related to security, or more specifically, the Western deep state and the history of its operations regarding counterintelligence, covert operations, and color revolutions in relation to its interference in the Black African struggle. These videos will hopefully give a fundamental outline of how our adversaries operate and explain the geopolitical dynamics surrounding the historical and contemporary events, and to project potential security issues that we will have to deal with coinciding with our development efforts. Before we get started, be sure to sign up at ogpeoples.org/join if you're interested in joining or supporting OPP, and don't forget to like or subscribe to our page or support us on Patreon. All the links mentioned will be in the description and comment section. To begin, our primary focus will be south of the Sahara in Africa, but we'll occasionally cover incidents involving the diaspora, as these events will be connected to key historical figures such as Marcus Garvey and others, to demonstrate the role of Western intelligence and the deep state's efforts to suppress African development. For the purpose of this video, I will be giving an overview of how these intelligence operations function and outline future threats to the motherland and our development plans. The role that intelligence agencies play in the motherland is to collect information on forces that are perceived as potential threats to their interests regionally. They do this by installing or having political allies locally or all the way to the national level to provide them with up-to-date intelligence that can be used later to thwart threats such as labor strikes, political protests against the allied ruling elite or governing entity, or worse, revolutionary activities that may overthrow that government. To thwart these potential unfavorable outcomes, foreign powers allied with these favored individuals through bribery, sponsorship, or supplying of resources such as technical equipment and weapons to prevent these undesired outcomes. One short yet simple example of this can be infiltration. Infiltration can be an individual or individuals joining an organization under the false pretense of actively supporting a movement or civic goals while gathering information on its members or the inner workings of the group that can use later to sow disruption, disunity amongst the rank and file, or worse, use an assassination of key figures within the group to ultimately divide and conquer. This infiltration can be organized by deep state actors at the underground level, which can include organized crime such as gangs, mafia, or drug cartels, or warlords/mercenary groups. By using such proxies, it allows foreign intelligence to outsource its sabotage efforts or assassination plots to disrupt or neutralize a movement or even an illegitimate democratically elected government. The intended effect by this damage is used as a geopolitical weapon covertly to maintain an ideal status quo for the intended target to protect the foreigner's interest in the region. These tactics can be applied at the government level, involving the nation's police or military. Circumstances that create this potential co-optation is because the governments in these global south countries, whose salaries for these officers and soldiers are often too low to deter potential turncoats from collaborating with foreign interests, being enticed by money and resources offered. Both criminal and non-criminal elements will be examined in future Blacklash videos by providing historical examples in Africa and the diaspora of how both are often used and trained by foreign powers. The final example regarding the deep state and intelligence will be military intervention. This option is only considered when intelligence agencies fail to bring about desired outcomes in target country or movement, where the foreign military can invade and coerce the government into submission or enforce regime change, as seen partly in the overthrow of Libya in 2011. This option is not preferred in the modern world, particularly by so-called liberal Western democracies, as it would violate agreed upon international laws. But as I will show in this video series, these laws will be violated by Western powers routinely and viciously to obstruct African peoples. As we reach the last part of this video, I will outline from my point of view various contemporary threats that exist to the motherland and the geopolitical dynamics involved and its potential threat to OPP development efforts. Let's start off with the minority level threats, starting with the Asians. The first group of Asians that I will be dealing with will be the West Asians, specifically the Arabs. The Arabs, who descend from the Arabian Peninsula in modern-day Saudi Arabia, currently occupy the North African region that stretches from the east coast of Egypt to the west coast of Africa and Morocco. Their presence in North Africa is due to the rise of Arab Islam led by the Arab prophet Muhammad and his Muslim conquest in the 7th century, and its influence spreading throughout the Sahel region in subsequent centuries, dating back to the rise of the Mali Empire. However, due to becoming victims of European colonialism in recent history, Northern Arab majority countries, in my view, has been mistakenly characterized as native Africans by some Pan-Africanists, glossing over their own history of colonialism, enslavement, and racism against African peoples over the last 1,000 years, as seen with its trans-Saharan slave trade, all in the name of African solidarity. I include the Arabs in this list because even though they are considered weaker than the foreign groups named on this list, the Arabs, in my view, can pose a buffer proxy threat to Africans south of the Sahara during our development process, whether it's for their own geopolitical reasons or to aid the West or the Europeans across the Mediterranean who would ideally like to prevent any form of unifying amongst African peoples south of the Sahara that would threaten their interests, as I've explained previously. We should expect these threats from the Arabs to take form by supporting Islamic fundamentalist terrorist groups such as Boko Haram or its counterparts across the Sahel or in Eastern Africa, where there's a significant Black African Muslim majority who may be ideal targets for recruitment due to impoverishment in these regions, thus making them appealing prospects. The next minority-level threat from Asia will be seen in the rise of Asian powers such as India and China. Both of these powers, who has been colonized to varying degrees by the Western world, have steadily become industrialized and geopolitically competitive with the West and has become part of an Asian bloc led by China that has become the world's manufacturing hub and supply chain source. As I explained in the previous video, the Chinese and by extension Asian demand for African natural resources for Asian industry will create a future catch-22 situation for African nations and OPP's development plans. Over the last couple of decades, key infrastructure has been built by Asian powers, providing a friendlier alternative to exploitative Western financing such as the IMF or the World Bank. The end result of this has led to the construction of roads, public transportation, hospitals, airports, and etc. in exchange for trade and access for Africa's resources. The problem with this is that in the future, as we begin to industrially develop throughout the continent, this will naturally lead to competition with existing Asian industry that will inevitably feel threatened by competing local African industry, or worse, the perceived threat to their access to resources being cut off. Ultimately, in my view, the prior investment by Asian-built industry will eventually become weaponized as geopolitical leverage for their own interests, or worse, collaboration with the next threat on this list. So in sum, the likely and primary form of threat that the East Asians will pose will likely be an economic threat more than likely. Expect this along with infiltration of Asian nationals who will gradually occupy positions of power with some of the African elite through the economy and government who will acquiesce to Asian interests as that they will be the preferred alternative to the primary threat on this list. The primary threat will be the Western world, whose imperialistic tentacles has already been firmly established over the last 500 years, dating back to the height of the Atlantic slave trade. Future Blacklash videos will provide historical documentation for those who disagree with this position in relation to Western interference in Africa, but I think most of us will agree on this primary point. The West, composing of the former Western European powers and led by their children in the United States, who's considered today's global superpower, already as we speak have deep entrenched interests economically and politically that craft a geopolitical desired outcome by orienting African countries to be dependent and primarily exporters of cheap unprocessed raw materials to the West for Western industry to process, manufacture, and sell back to Africans at higher prices or offer them as loans or aid with debt attached. This geopolitical script has been established since the initial invasions of Africa during the 16th and 19th centuries and has been perfected since then through the post-colonial period, which takes shape in the form of neocolonialism as coined by our honorable ancestor Kwame Nkrumah. Since 1945, any attempts to go off script has led to the overthrow of regimes such as Nkrumah or the assassinations of notable African leaders such as Emile Cabral, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and many more. This neo-colonial dynamic has been reinforced by the Western backings of dictators and an elite class who serves their interests or control the levers of economic power through the existing infrastructure, food supply, media, mining industry, and Western satellite businesses to operate to attract resources and provide temporary employment for locals and tax revenues just enough to prop up African leaders before they run back to the IMF or the World Bank for Western financing. These geopolitical dynamics will be the backdrop for us to navigate, as the Western world has proven that despite its liberal rhetoric, it will kill and destroy to protect its privileged position, as seen in large scale in the past decade or so, with the destruction of Libya by NATO and the presence of American and European forces through AFRICOM, or the French in the Sahel region, and other powers. Expect the continued collaboration of the African elite with these Western sponsors, as we already described. In conclusion, with all that to say, future Blacklash videos will provide historical context to offer a solution to the overall threats described in this video, and will prepare us to meet them and neutralize them for the short and long term. If you're interested in joining OPP, the link will be in the description and in the comments section below. Until next time, Abibi Fahudie, and blessings to the ancestors.